You mentioned you're the son of a coach. Brendan is your dad. I'm 52. I think you're 50, right? You're just a couple of years younger than me. And I remember as a New York kid being on the campus of the University of Michigan as the Bad Boys were beginning to blossom. Man, did I hate their guts. I absolutely hated their guts, to be very honest with you. Were you like a teenager with a front row seat during practice watching those guys?
Oh, man. I've been really privileged, Rich. Obviously my father started out as a high school coach in New York City, Powell Memorial, and worked his way into the NBA. And, I'm in high school, used to go to the New York Knicks games with Pat Ewing, and being able to shoot around Madison Square Garden as a young kid from Queens and Long Island was like a dream. And then he goes to Detroit and the Bad Boys and the back-to-back championships, and being around Isaiah Thomas, Joe Dumars, Vinnie Johnson, John Sally. I was really fortunate to grow up as the son of a coach, and I just have great memories of driving around when he was an assistant coach at Syracuse and going to games in New York City and helping recruit Pearl Washington and other guys that he would be watching and recruiting. So I have so many stories, and just really blessed to have that experience as the son of a coach, and I believe that's really helped me become the coach that I am today.
Was that Bernard King too? Was Bernard around at that time when you were on the floor?
That was after, obviously. Ernie and Bernie down in Tennessee, Ernie Grunfeld and Bernard King.
That's right.
But I remember, Billy Donovan, Mark Jackson, Kenny Smith, Dwayne Washington. There's so many players in the New York City area that I just would be walking around with my father watching these games, and I loved it.
And so what presence did Chuck Daly have in your life?
Coach? Yeah, obviously Chuck Daly, one of the greatest coaches in NBA history, and just whether it was Hubie Brown with the Knicks, whether it was a Chuck Daly, whether it was Jeff and Stan Van Gundy, all guys that my father worked for. Yeah. Again, it wasn't just the players, but as an aspiring coach myself, just to be a fly on the wall, to learn, to pick things up, to see how they coach. And every coach is different. You have a guy in Chuck Daly who looked the part. He's one of the best dressed coaches in NBA history. And then you had other guys, who just, grinded out coaches who were, their work ethic is legendary. So I think you can learn and take something from everybody along the way. And that's what I try to do from my father. But even when I was an assistant for many years in the league, learning from the guys that I worked for.
What about, you got a good story from, I guess, let's just throw out the Pistons days? Did Mahorn come up to you? Did Lambier haze you? Did anything happen? Rodman, anything from the Bad Boy days that you might remember?
I just remember, being around those teams, and this is the Bad Boys and them in Chicago just having battles. And obviously Chicago had to get through Detroit for their ascension and to go on their historic run that they wind up going on with Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen and Phil Jackson. But I just remember being at practices and listening to Joe Dumars, talking about, how hard it was to guard a guy like Michael Jordan. And he would come down on the break and he'd literally put the ball on his hand and he could just go wherever he wanted. And just, I never took it for granted. Here I am, a young kid being around NBA players, NBA champions, and just they always treated me well, and it was always a pleasure to be around those teams, whether it was a Knicks team, a Piston team, my father's first head coaching job in Toronto, whatever it was. I always took a lot of joy in terms of seeing my father and being around those teams.
I got to be honest, I have just, again, such an affinity for those times, and it's just like any generation, right? My generation's better than the current generation, but is the game better now, or because, obviously it's a more three-point centric game. Nobody's put on their ass as much as those back in the day. What's your philosophy on all that, being a head coach in this current day and age and seeing what used to be in this league?
Well, yeah, it's funny. I speak to my father about it all the time, and he's obviously old school. He was in the league for a long time, and he has a hard time watching the NBA game today because of, as you mentioned, all the three-point shooting. And let's be honest, the game has changed. You mentioned it, guys getting put on their ass. You've talked about the Bad Boys. I go back to the New York Knicks, Charles Oakley and Patrick Ewing and those guys. The game has changed, and the NBA wanted the game to change. They wanted to clean it up. They wanted to make it more fan-friendly. And that is always what that means is they've tried to make it more scoring because scoring makes more fans watch and more entertainment, and that's what it's all about. But I like the old days. I like the physicality, no layups, not dirty, not trying to hurt anybody, but, making people feel you out there. And I think there's some teams that play like that now, but the game has definitely changed. And the reality is, Rich, the game is always changing. It's constantly changing. It's constantly evolving, and you have to be willing to change with it.
Hey, you watched all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Watch more right here.